Drug kingpins don't always start as criminals. In many cases, they begin in ordinary professions where access, trust, or specialized skills quietly open the door to organized crime. Curtis Malone. Curtis Malone built his early reputation inside Washington, D.C.'s youth basketball ecosystem during the 1990s, a period when Amateur Athletic Union or AAU basketball programs became the primary pipeline to college and professional basketball. It operates as a year-round competitive circuit outside of school teams and concentrates on elite youth talent, exposes players to college recruiters, and requires extensive travel, funding, and organizational control. Malone founded and ran Team Takeover, one of the most influential AAU programs in the region, giving him authority over access to tournaments, playing time, and college exposure for hundreds of teenagers. Malone's public role was that of a coach and mentor. He organized practices nearly year-round, arranged transportation, housed players who lacked stable homes, and acted as a father figure for boys growing up amid poverty, addiction, and high incarceration rates in D.C. This role earned deep trust from families and the broader community. His teams produced Division I recruits and NBA players, which further reinforced his credibility and shielded him from scrutiny. Behind the scenes, the informal financial structure of elite AAU basketball created opportunity for abuse. Travel costs, tournament fees, equipment, and housing require large amounts of cash, often with little oversight. Malone controlled these logistics. According to federal investigators, he used this structure to launder and conceal proceeds from cocaine trafficking. Drug profits funded team operations, paid expenses, and reinforced loyalty, while the basketball program itself provided a legitimate front that explained constant travel, cash flow, and interstate movement. Malone's drug trafficking ran parallel to his basketball work. Law enforcement later determined that he was importing and distributing significant quantities of cocaine while continuing to coach and manage youth teams. Because his public identity was that of a community leader dedicated to saving kids, suspicion was minimal. Parents, players, and even local officials viewed him as a stabilizing force rather than a criminal actor. The operation unraveled when federal authorities connected Malone's financial activities and communications to a broader drug investigation. Surveillance and wiretaps revealed that the same organizational skills used to run elite basketball programs were being applied to a cocaine distribution network. When agents raided his home, the contrast between his public persona and private criminal activity became undeniable. Malone was arrested, convicted on federal drug charges, and sentenced to 8 years and 4 months in prison. Chalino Sanchez. Chalino Sanchez's entry into the drug world did not come through trafficking logistics or distribution networks, but through cultural access. Born Rosalino Sanchez Felix in rural Sinaloa, Mexico, he grew up in poverty and violence, leaving school early and crossing into the United States as an undocumented migrant. In California, he worked low-paying jobs, including agricultural labor and dishwashing, while also spending time around people involved in crime and smuggling. Sanchez's connection to drug traffickers emerged through music. While serving time in prison for unrelated offenses, he began writing corridos, narrative folk songs that tell stories about real people and events. Many of the inmates around him were traffickers, enforcers, or associates of organized crime. Sanchez turned their lives into songs, naming names, describing specific acts, and portraying traffickers as powerful figures who rose through violence and risk. After his release, Sanchez continued writing and performing these songs publicly. Unlike traditional folk musicians, he sang about living traffickers, not historical figures. This made his music valuable inside criminal circles. Drug traffickers began paying Sanchez to write and perform corridos that glorified their operations, their reputations, and their enemies' defeats. These commissioned songs functioned as reputation-building tools, spreading fear and prestige at the same time. Sanchez's profession became intertwined with organized crime without him formally joining a cartel. He operated as a cultural intermediary, using music to amplify the status of traffickers while gaining protection, money, and access. His performances often took place at private parties and venues attended by cartel figures, placing him directly inside high-risk environments controlled by violent actors. As his fame grew, Sanchez's visibility increased on both sides of the border. He survived multiple violent incidents, including being shot during a live performance, which further elevated his legend. This survival reinforced his image as someone protected by powerful forces, even though it also increased the danger around him. In 1992, Sanchez was murdered after a performance in Culiacan, Sinaloa. While responsibility was never officially resolved, authorities and journalists widely linked his death to cartel-related retaliation. Owen Hansen. Owen Hansen grew up in Redondo Beach, California, and pursued sports as a structured path out of a broken household. His father emphasized athletics as discipline and a way to earn a college scholarship, framing sports as the primary route to stability. Hansen excelled in volleyball, gained national recognition, and earned a scholarship to the University of Southern California. At USC, he struggled to compete physically at the elite collegiate level and was redshirted, meaning he stayed on the roster but did not compete while developing physically. Redshirting removed him from testing oversight tied to active competition, creating a window with fewer institutional controls. Seeking rapid physical improvement, Hansen turned to performance-enhancing drugs. He learned how to acquire anabolic steroids and growth hormones illegally by traveling across the US and Mexico border to purchase them from pharmacies without prescriptions. This initial act of smuggling was small in scale, but psychologically significant. It introduced Hansen to the mechanics of border evasion, deception of authorities, and the emotional reward of successfully moving illegal goods undetected. That experience reshaped his view of crime. Breaking the law without immediate consequences made illegal activity feel practical, profitable, and low risk if done carefully. Hansen later described it as the point where illegal business began to make sense as a viable path rather than a one-time mistake. After his volleyball path stalled, Hansen used his enhanced physique to walk onto USC's football team during a nationally dominant era. While football elevated his social status and expanded his network, it also exposed him to an environment where drug use, partying, and informal drug distribution were common and largely ignored if athletic performance was maintained. Hansen began selling recreational drugs within his social circle to support his lifestyle. After graduation, Hansen moved fully into organized trafficking. He applied the same logistical thinking he had learned in sports to his drug operations. His activities escalated from local distribution to large-scale international trafficking, including cocaine and other narcotics, with operations spanning multiple countries. Federal prosecutors later demonstrated that Hansen ran a sophisticated trafficking organization that moved significant quantities of drugs while laundering proceeds through legitimate-appearing businesses. Hansen was ultimately arrested, convicted in federal court on multiple drug trafficking, conspiracy, and distribution charges, and sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, completing his transition from NCAA athlete to international drug trafficker. Barry Seal. In his early 20s, he was hired by Transworld Airlines, TWA, and became the youngest captain in the company's history, flying long-haul international routes and gaining deep familiarity with global air traffic systems and aviation regulations. Despite the prestige, Seal grew dissatisfied with routine airline work. The structure, oversight, and repetition conflicted with his appetite for risk and independence. While still employed, he was introduced to smuggling through fellow pilots and aviation contacts already moving illegal cargo. These early jobs involved non-drug contraband and showed him that his flying skills could bypass customs and law enforcement with relatively low risk. Seal's airline career ended after he was arrested by U.S. Customs for attempting to smuggle military-grade explosives. Although the case did not result in a long prison sentence, it permanently ended his commercial aviation career. Cut off from legitimate airline work but still possessing aircraft access and technical expertise, Seal turned fully to smuggling as his primary income. He initially trafficked marijuana, then shifted to cocaine as demand surged in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Cocaine's high value-to-weight ratio made aviation smuggling extremely profitable, with single flights earning far more than any legal pilot's salary. Seal constructed a sophisticated smuggling operation that functioned like a private airline. He maintained multiple aircraft, used rural airstrips, coordinated timed landings, and employed ground crews who never met each other. Flights were flown at night with lights off, often skimming the Gulf of Mexico to blend in with offshore oil traffic. These methods reduced detection and allowed SEAL to move massive quantities of drugs into the United States. As law enforcement pressure increased, SEAL attempted to protect himself by spreading rumors that he was connected to U.S. intelligence agencies. Eventually, federal agencies gathered sufficient evidence through surveillance, wiretaps, and undercover work. SEAL was arrested and later cooperated as an informant, providing information on cartel operations. His cooperation made him a liability to the very organizations he once served. After being convicted on federal drug charges and placed under limited protection, SEAL was assassinated in 1986. Ryan Wedding. Ryan Wedding began as a professional snowboarder who represented Canada at the highest level, including the Winter Olympics. Olympic athletes operate within tightly regulated systems that involve national sports federations, sponsorships, international travel, and constant movement across borders. This lifestyle gave him experience with logistics, discretion, and frequent cross-border movement without drawing suspicion. After his competitive snowboarding career ended, Wedding struggled to find stability, losing the structure, income, and identity that once defined his life. During this period, he became connected to drug traffickers through social and nightlife circles, often associated with retired professional athletes. Wedding's entry into drug trafficking began at an operational level rather than street dealing. He used his experience traveling internationally to assist with logistics, coordination, and movement of cocaine shipments. His clean image as a former Olympian allowed him to pass through airports, hotels, and international locations with minimal scrutiny. Over time, he moved from logistics to leadership. Investigators later showed that he coordinated major cocaine shipments traveling from South America through Mexico and into North America. The operation used multiple layers of communication and relied on couriers and middlemen to keep senior figures insulated from direct contact with drugs. The organization was tightly compartmentalized, with transporters, storage handlers, and distributors rarely aware of the full operation. This structure reduced risk and mirrored the hierarchy and discipline of professional sports teams, allowing the network to operate for an extended period without disruption. Law enforcement attention intensified after multiple international seizures were linked to the same coordination methods and communication patterns. Financial records, encrypted messages, and cooperating witnesses linked Wedding to the trafficking network, along with acts of violence ordered to protect it. Wedding was charged by U.S. federal authorities with operating a large-scale international cocaine trafficking conspiracy. He was placed on most wanted lists. A $15 million reward was offered for information leading to his capture, and assets connected to the operation, including luxury vehicles, were seized. He has not been captured to this day. Joseph Miedzianowski. Joseph Miedzianowski built his career inside the Chicago Police Department, earning dozens of commendations over more than 2 decades for arrests, drug seizures, and weapons recoveries. He rose into specialized gang and narcotics units, giving him access to sensitive intelligence, undercover operations, and confidential informants, placing him directly inside the system meant to dismantle drug trafficking. While working narcotics cases, Miedzianowski and close associates stole drugs and cash during raids and arrests, diverting seized narcotics for resale instead of logging them into evidence. This allowed him to enter the drug trade without suppliers, smugglers, or startup costs. Miedzianowski's law enforcement role gave him unique advantages. He knew which dealers were vulnerable, which investigations were active, and how police units operated. He used this information to protect certain gangs, warn traffickers of impending raids, and target competitors who refused to cooperate. In exchange, he received cash payments and a share of drug proceeds. Over time, Miedzianowski expanded from theft and protection into full-scale distribution. He partnered with gang leaders and organized a cocaine pipeline that moved drugs from Florida into Chicago. The operation supplied multiple street gangs and relied on Miedzianowski's ability to shield shipments and dealers from law enforcement interference. His badge functioned as both cover and enforcement tool, allowing him to intimidate rivals and silence witnesses. The operation lasted for years because it blended seamlessly into legitimate police work. Miedzianowski continued making arrests, attending work, and receiving praise while simultaneously running a drug enterprise. His criminal activity was protected by the Blue Wall, the informal code that discourages officers from reporting misconduct by colleagues. Federal investigators eventually uncovered the operation through wiretaps, cooperating witnesses, and recorded conversations. The evidence showed Midzyanovsky as the central organizer. He was arrested, charged with racketeering and drug conspiracy, and sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole, one of the harshest sentences ever imposed on a U.S. law enforcement officer. Ross Ulbricht. Ross Ulbricht grew up in Texas on a conventional, high-achieving path. He earned strong grades, became an Eagle Scout, emphasizing discipline and ethics, and studied physics and materials science at university, fields centered on systems thinking and technical precision. At this stage, his future appeared aimed at academia or engineering, not crime. Ulbricht's shift began during graduate school, where he became deeply interested in libertarian and anarchist ideas centered on personal freedom and minimal government control. He came to believe that individuals should be free to buy and sell goods without state interference, even if those goods were illegal under current law. This belief reframed laws in his mind as obstacles rather than boundaries, especially in areas involving drugs. After leaving graduate school, Ulbricht attempted several legitimate business ventures, including day trading and an online book resale operation. These efforts either failed or produced modest returns, reinforcing his frustration with traditional paths to success. At the same time, he was learning computer programming and becoming familiar with encryption, anonymity tools, and emerging digital currencies. Ulbricht's turning point was the creation of an online marketplace designed to operate beyond government reach. He built a website on the dark web, a portion of the internet accessible only through specialized software that hides user identities. To solve the problem of traceable payments, he adopted Bitcoin, a decentralized digital currency that allowed transactions without direct links to real-world identities. The platform, later known as Silk Road, functioned as an anonymous marketplace where vendors and buyers could trade goods with minimal oversight. While the site allowed various listings, its primary activity quickly became drug sales. Ulbricht did not personally sell narcotics. Instead, he operated as the administrator, taking a commission on each transaction and enforcing rules designed to keep violence and fraud off the platform. As Silk Road grew, it facilitated hundreds of millions of dollars in drug transactions worldwide. Ulbricht's technical role insulated him from direct contact with drugs while positioning him as the central authority controlling the marketplace. He managed disputes, oversaw security measures, and made decisions that shaped the platform's scale and reach. Federal investigators eventually identified Ulbricht through a combination of digital forensics, online behavior, and operational mistakes. He was arrested, charged, and convicted on multiple federal counts, including operating a continuing criminal enterprise and conspiracy to traffic narcotics. The case established that running a digital platform that enables large-scale drug sales carries the same criminal liability as traditional trafficking leadership. In 2015, Ulbricht was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole, plus 40 additional years. Doug Dodd and Lance Barabas. Doug Dodd and Lance Barabas grew up in Hudson, Florida, as competitive high school wrestlers with no early ties to organized crime. Their environment, however, placed them at the center of a rapidly expanding pharmaceutical opioid market in the early 2000s. Their involvement in drugs began through personal misuse rather than trafficking. Like many teenagers at the time, they were introduced to OxyContin, a prescription opioid heavily marketed as a safe painkiller. When abused, it produces heroin-like effects, creating rapid addiction and high demand. They soon realized prescription pills were far easier to obtain than street drugs due to lax prescribing standards and Florida's pill mill doctors. The transition from users to dealers happened quickly. Dodd and Barabas learned that pills could be acquired legally through doctors and resold illegally for large profits. They recruited friends to visit doctors, paid for medical appointments, and collected the prescriptions. This method allowed them to scale supply without manufacturing or importing drugs. As demand grew, they expanded beyond local sales. Their network moved OxyContin to college campuses and out-of-state buyers using low-profile shipping methods. Cash payments were concealed inside everyday items, including stuffed animals, to avoid detection. At its peak, the operation moved tens of thousands of pills per month and generated hundreds of thousands of dollars. Their image as young athletes helped shield them from suspicion. They lived openly, spent freely, and blended into affluent neighborhoods despite their age. They relied on volume rather than violence, exploiting legal loopholes and weak oversight rather than intimidation. As opioid overdoses surged nationwide, federal investigators traced prescription patterns, shipment routes, and financial flows back to the group. Both were convicted on federal drug trafficking charges for distributing OxyContin across state lines. Doug Dodd was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, while Lance Barabas received 25 years, reflecting his leadership role and the scale of the operation. These stories show that drug empires don't always start in the underworld. If you want to see how these criminal organizations rise, operate, and eventually collapse, click one of our other organized crime videos now.